London, a city shrouded in mist and history, stood silent in the early morning chill. Thousands gathered, their breaths visible in the cold air, their eyes locked on the wooden scaffold at the center of the square. This was no ordinary execution. This was a display of power, a message written in blood and agony. The condemned was no common criminal. He was a traitor. And for that crime, there would be no swift mercy, only the slow, excruciating punishment of being hanged, drawn, and quartered. The wooden cart creaked as it rolled over the cobbled streets. The man bound atop it, once proud, now broken, did not plead. He had no illusions. The fate that awaited him was reserved for those who defied the monarchy itself. In the eyes of the crown, he was not just a rebel. He was an insult to the divine order. And for such crimes, death was not enough. What followed was not just punishment, but a spectacle. A horror designed not merely to kill, but to terrify. The punishment of hanging, drawing, and quartering was no mere execution. It was a ritual of destruction, a declaration that no man, however brave, however righteous, could stand against the king and live. The origins of this brutal execution trace back to the reign of Henry III in 1241, when treason became the ultimate crime. In medieval England, the king was not just a ruler. He was God's appointed authority on earth. To betray him was to defy the divine order, a sin so grievous that it demanded the harshest retribution. By the 13th century, England was a kingdom ruled by fear and absolute loyalty. Even the faintest act of defiance could be seen as treason. Justice? It was not about fairness. It was about control. Those who dared to challenge the monarchy were not simply killed. They were made into examples, suffering a fate so gruesome that rebellion would seem unthinkable. The first recorded victim of this full execution was William Maurice in 1241, condemned for piracy. But soon, this punishment evolved. It became a weapon, a tool of political suppression. The process was deliberately agonizing. The condemned were dragged through the streets, their bodies scraped raw, humiliated before the people. They were hanged, but cut down before death, left gasping for air, kept alive just long enough for what came next. Their stomachs were slit open, intestines ripped out and burned before their eyes. And finally, they were quartered, their severed limbs sent to different corners of the kingdom. This was more than punishment. It was a spectacle of terror and power, a warning to all who would dare defy the throne. And no case embodied this horror more than that of defied A.P. Gruffydd, the last independent Prince of Wales. His execution would redefine the price of defiance. October 3rd, 1283, London stood still. Thousands gathered, pressing against one another, straining to see. The air was thick with tension, a mixture of excitement and unease. This was not just an execution. This was history in the making. For the first time, a nobleman of high status would endure the full measure of the king's punishment. This was not about justice. This was a message, a declaration of power, a warning to all who dared defy the English crown. Dafydd ap Gruffydd. Once a Prince of Wales, now a prisoner. Shackled in chains, his clothes tattered and stained, he was dragged through the streets. His hands bound, his body jolted with every movement of the horse pulling him forward. The roads were rough, unforgiving, the jeers of the crowd even more so. But he did not cry out. Some in the crowd cheered, eager for the spectacle. Others watched in silence, uncertain whether they were witnessing justice or something else entirely. Yet no one could look away. This was a moment meant to be remembered. At the execution site, the noose was placed around his neck. The crowd fell quiet.
The executioner worked with practiced precision, ensuring that the suffering was drawn out. Just when it seemed the end was near, the rope was cut. Dafydd collapsed. Gasping, struggling for air, his body trembled. But this was only the beginning. Before him, a fire burned. Nearby, a blade glinted in the morning sun. What followed was deliberate, calculated. Every step was exacting, methodical, designed not just to end his life, but to make an example of him. But his fate did not end there. Even in death, the sentence continued. His remains were divided, scattered across the kingdom. His legacy erased, his title, his land, his very existence, all wiped away. Wales had lost its last prince, and England had ensured his story would be told only as a warning. Dafydd's execution was not merely a sentence, it was a statement. A display of unchallenged authority, meant to be remembered long after the final blow was struck. The English monarchy had crafted the ultimate deterrent, a fate so severe that it would linger in the minds of all who dared defy the crown. And so, history followed its course. Each punishment, more severe than the last. Each execution, a public warning, ensuring that defiance would be met with consequences beyond imagination. 1305. William Wallace, the warrior who stood against England. Paraded through the streets, his once proud form weakened, his body bearing the scars of defiance. He faced the scaffold, enduring agony beyond measure. When his suffering ended, his remains were placed upon London Bridge, a lasting sign that no rebellion would go unanswered. 1326. Hugh Despenser the Younger, a noble, once trusted by the crown, later branded a traitor. His fall from grace was met with an unimaginable fate. His torment stretched beyond the limits of endurance, his legacy shattered, his name erased from power. Even centuries later, the echoes of such punishments remained. 1606. Guy Fawkes, the man behind the gunpowder plot. Facing the inevitable, he chose his own end. Leaping from the scaffold, escaping a prolonged ordeal. But even in death, his fate was not his own. His body was divided, his remains spread across the land. A reminder not of his cause, but of the consequences of defying the state. These were not simple executions. They were orchestrated displays of power, designed to instill obedience, to extinguish resistance, to remind all that the authority of the crown was absolute. Justice was never the purpose. It was control. It was fear. It was erasure. The ritual of execution. These public executions were not just punishments. They were carefully orchestrated displays designed to instill fear deep within the hearts of all who witnessed them. From the moment a man was convicted of treason, his fate was sealed, not just in death, but in a prolonged and humiliating ordeal. Every step had a purpose: to humiliate, to break, to erase. His name would not be remembered as a man, but as a warning. Dragged through the streets, the condemned was paraded before the crowds, hands bound, body jolting with every rough movement. The streets were unforgiving, the jeers even more so. Mercy was absent. Humiliation came first. A message, loud and clear: defy the king, and disgrace is your only fate. Hanged, but not until death. The noose tightened, the body convulsed in the air. But the end did not come quickly. Just as unconsciousness threatened to take hold, the rope was cut. The condemned fell to the ground, gasping for breath, body weak. But the ordeal was far from over. The final act. As the crowd grew restless, the punishment continued. The executioner, precise and practiced, followed each step with cold efficiency.
This was not just about justice, it was about power, a demonstration that no traitor would be allowed to slip into history without a brutal reminder of their crime. Beheading and division. Even in death, the sentence was not complete. The severed head was displayed, placed where all could see, a lasting warning of the consequences of treason. The rest of the body was divided, sent across different regions of the kingdom, a final reminder that no enemy of the crown would remain whole. For the people of medieval England, this was not just law, it was spectacle. Parents brought their children, believing that witnessing such events would teach obedience. Merchants sold food and drink near the execution grounds, as if this were just another public gathering. The crowd cheered, jeered, and watched. To them, it was a performance. But for the condemned, it was the end. And the monarchy? It thrived on this fear. Every public display of punishment, every symbol of royal authority, each one was a reminder of an undeniable truth. The king's power was absolute, and no one who defied him could escape the price. But no tyranny lasts forever. By the 18th and 19th centuries, even England itself began to question the savagery of its justice. The world was changing, and the image of a nation built on public disembowelment, it no longer fit the ideals of civilization. The voices of reason grew louder. Philosophers like Jeremy Bentham, writers like Charles Dickens, they condemned it, called it a relic of barbarism, a mark of a past that no longer had a place in a world moving forward. And then, the final turning point, 1870. The punishment of hanging, drawing, and quartering was officially abolished. The era of public dismemberment, over. But history does not forget. The blood of those who suffered still stains the pages of time. And their voices, they whisper. Across the centuries, a question that refuses to be silenced. Was this truly justice? Or was it simply fear masquerading as law?